This is Tax Watch 2015. I'm John Benetti,
And I'm Tyler Bell.
and we're here to give you, the citizens, the information you need to know about how your taxes are calculated and for what.
First, we go to John, who interviewed a high-ranking city official in his hometown of Milford, Connecticut, seeking to answer our fundamental question of how and why budgeting and taxation policies matter for our community.
This is John Benetti here reporting on budgeting and taxation policies in Milford, Connecticut. I'm here today with James Albert Chitelli, the former mayor of Milford, Connecticut, and the current Chief Operating Officer of the Milford Public Schools. Mr. Chitelli, nice to have you today.
Nice to be here, John.
Thank you very much for your time. So can you outline for me generally the city budgeting process, where the city budget is initially created and by who?
Sure. The city of Milford has what we call a weak mayor form of government, but really it all starts with the mayor's office. And the mayor, usually in October, disseminates the budget packages to all of the different departments. They come up with their departmental budgets and then submit them to the mayor. Mayor goes through them, then we'll meet with all of the different department heads. And by the middle of January, pretty much has the budget ready. So January 31st, or actually February 1st, the mayor submits his budget or her budget to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance will then meet with all of the different departments. They'll hold public hearings, and at the end of that, they will make a recommendation as to whether the mayor's budget should be passed on, whether they change it, reduce it, or they even could add to it. It happens very, very infrequently that they add to it. But then from there, the Board of Finance recommendation goes to the Board of Aldermen. And the Board of Aldermen is the legislative body of the city, and they have the final say. But they'll go through the same process as the Board of Finance. They'll hold public hearings. They will meet with all of the different departments. Then they'll deliberate on a budget, and they will pass it usually the middle to end of May. Now, on the Board of Education side, we're preparing our budget kind of the same time frame, October to January. Then we meet with our Board of Education, and the Board of Education makes a final proposed budget. And then that goes to the mayor, who presents it as one big package to the Board of Finance.
How does the Board of Aldermen pass the budget? Is it by a simple majority, or does it have to be unanimous?
Sure. Well, they take the Board of Finance budget, and they can do the same thing. They can lower it or they can raise it. Any proposal to lower the budget is a simple majority vote. Any proposal to raise the Board of Finance recommendation takes a 2/3 vote. And so usually they'll start out with saying we move to approve the Board of Finance budget with the following amendments. And then if it's a reduction, simple majority vote. If it's an addition, which again happens so infrequently, but once in a while it does, that would require a 2/3 vote.
So as far as funding the budgets go, both for the city and the Board of Education, what tax sources does the city draw on particularly, and in general?
Yep. The revenue that the city generates is basically there's two sources of taxes: the real estate property taxes and personal property taxes, which is generally the vehicles. The residents, if they're registered vehicles to a person in Milford, they're taxed. And in addition, the commercial and industrial, their equipment is also taxed by the city. So those are the sources of revenue that the city has through taxation. And then the rest of the budget comes from mostly state grants. There isn't a lot of them. I think, going back to my days with the city, I think that it's about 13% of the city's budget comes from grants, either from the federal government or the state government. But that's really the sources of revenue. Taxes through personal property and both cars and business equipment, and then the real estate taxes.
Right. So as far as real estate taxes go, Could you explain for me some terms that we always see in the news, what the mill rate is, how it's calculated, how that fits into calculating property taxes, the role that assessments and appraisals play?
Sure. The city has an assessor, and it's the assessor's job to put a value on anything that can be taxed. So every parcel of land in Milford has a value. And same thing, every vehicle has a value. Every bit of manufacturing equipment or commercial equipment has a value. And it's a huge database that the assessor has. But it's based upon, assessments are done on real estate taxes every 10 years or thereabouts. And people hate to hear reassessment because there can be a major shift in the value of property. But at the end of it all, the assessor will take that total value, which is called the grand list of the city, and then taxes are based upon a percentage of the grand list. So if the mill rate is, we'll just take a round number, if the mill rate is 30 mills, what a mill is $1 of taxes per every $1,000 of assessed value. And so if somebody's, my math is going to get a little messed up here, I'm sure, but if somebody had a house that was valued at $100,000 and the mill rate was 30 mills, they would pay $3,000 in taxes. So that's what the mill rate is. And then, so what the aldermen have to do is, once they determine a budget, how much money the expenditures are going to be, then they have to look at how much revenue they're going to get from state grants and other smaller sources of revenue. And then whatever's left over, they have to apply the mill rate, because then that determines how much taxes are collected.
Right, so thank you for that. And what if there's to be a big capital improvement project, such as a school renovation, or you need to build a bridge that runs through the city? How would the city fund that and appropriate for that, given the revenue on hand, or do they use the revenue on hand? You mentioned grants a short while ago. Does that have any say and help in funding these projects?
It does. All major capital expenditures are actually outside of the general budget of the city. Every year, in addition to the general budget, the mayor also puts forth a capital improvement plan. And that's completely separate from the general operating budget of the city. The mayor takes a snapshot in time of 5 years ahead, and to determine what the city's going to need, over the next 5 years, and then each year we'll decide how much money can be spent, and the revenue that is needed for capital improvement projects comes from bonding. The mayor will propose a bond authorization for a certain amount of money to pay for the capital projects for that year. The schools also submit to the mayor for the projects that we need for the schools, and those are eligible for 50% reimbursement from the state. The reimbursement rate changes from year to year. Right now it happens to be exactly 50%, but it's been as low as 39% and it's been as high as 55%. So that changes every year. But that's where major projects are bonded. And then what a bond is it's basically a credit card. The city borrows money from, it's very complicated, but the city borrows money and then pays it back over a 20-year period. And that's how those major capital improvement projects are funded.
Right, and with major capital improvement projects and this obvious continuing debt when you bond projects like this, there has to be some kind of a rating standard that the city has. Do you know if we have a credit rating and what it is? And general figures like that?
Sure. Milford has an excellent bond rating. We're a AA plus. So Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, which are the three major rating agencies, all rate us. They have different ways of saying it, but it's a AA plus. The only thing higher is a AAA. And we've fluttered right around there. But that's a AAA rating is for communities like the Greenwiches and Avon and things like that that have very, very wealthy.
Right.
So we have a great bond rating. It's a big reason for that is that good mix of industrial, commercial, and residential. That's a big piece of it. And then the city has to show those bond rating agencies that we have, prudent, conservative budgeting practices in place. And we've been able to do that. Over the years, we've funded responsibly. Our pension programs and our insurance programs, we didn't, when the actuaries told us what we needed to pay, we paid that amount. And so we're fully funded in all of those different funds. Communities that, over the years, if the bond, or if the actuaries said, you need to put this much money into your pension fund, but they only put in, we'll say, 75% of what the actuaries told them, every year that compounds and compounds. And those are the communities that have lower bond ratings. So we've been very fortunate in Milford. But yeah, AA plus.
Good, that's good news for our citizens. They can expect things to get done without running into financial straits. So, in the process of collecting taxes, certain people may not pay their property taxes. Can you explain to me how property taxes are collected and what happens when people go delinquent or default and they don't pay their property taxes?
Yeah, well, of course, we have a tax collector, and once the assessor sets the gram rate, and then the Board of Aldermen sets the mill rate, it's the tax collector's responsibility to do the billing. All of the bills go out to all of the different taxpayers, and then they have, taxes are due on July 1st. We actually have a 30-day grace period, so August 1st. And we have had an excellent, and which is another reason for our good bond rating, we've had an excellent tax collection rate. It's hovered, north of 98% collections. So, that's, you can't get too much better than that. But when somebody does fall into delinquency, the tax collector will always try and work out payment plans and things like that. If that, and with a number of taxpayers, it does happen that they just fall behind. Eventually, we would have to foreclose on the property. It happens very infrequently. The city will do everything that they can to work with the taxpayer to get them to the point where they can, even if it takes 15 to 20 years to pay up, we'd rather have that than to foreclose on the property. And if we do have to go that route, the city would foreclose on it. And then if eventually the city takes the property, we could have an auction. More than likely, we would sell that foreclosure to a bank or something, and they would pay a certain amount of money on the dollar, and then they would get rid of it. But eventually, the city will get its taxes, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time.
Right. So, as Chief Operating Officer of the Milford Public Schools, what role do you play in creating the Board of Ed budget?
Okay. Well, really, it's the superintendent of schools is the person that, it's her budget.
Right.
And she will present a budget to the Board of Education, who then has to come up with a proposed budget to send to the mayor. But as the operations officer, I'm responsible for the dissemination of the budget materials, and then, getting it into form for the superintendent to then present to the Board of Education. So, similar to the mayor, we send out packages in late September, early October. We send them out to all of the schools, and we also send them out to the major departments. like facilities and maintenance is a big department within the Board of Education. The special education department or pupil personnel has a huge portion of the budget. And then all the schools get a certain amount of money that they can use. We call it a per pupil calculation. So for there's a certain dollar amount for every pupil that's in the school that the principal has some discretion over how that's spent within their school. So all of those packages go out, it comes back to us, we put it together, and then the superintendent, assistant superintendent, myself, and the business office manager will get together with all of those different department heads or principals, and we'll do the same thing that the mayor does. In the end, finally come up with a budget that we think is responsible, but also meets the needs of the school district, and then superintendent will present that to the Board of Education.
So thank you, Mr. Chitelli,
You're very
for
welcome,
taking your
John.
time to talk with me today.
My pleasure.
Okay. Next we go to Tyler, who is going to tell us about budgeting and taxation policies in Maryland.
Thanks, John. I went to Maryland and I spoke to some residents regarding local taxes, taxation policies, and budgeting in the state of Maryland. Maryland is well known for some of its high taxes but high rewards, such as very proficient school districts, spending on infrastructure, maintenance of public infrastructure projects, and other things paid for with general funding. In Maryland, though, everything is done through the state. State property taxes are very high, and the state is the one that collects all the taxes because Maryland has a substantially large state government. In addition, the state government of Maryland also provides a lot of services for the District of Columbia, such as public sanitation in the Washington Sanitation Commission, primarily funded through Maryland and Virginia. In return for this, the federal government will give the state of Maryland substantial loans and grants of money because they contribute to a federal district as well as they house substantial federal installations. In Maryland, so taxation and budgeting, specifically taxation, is highly political in Maryland. Every 10 years they reevaluate their taxes and the property tax, as is fairly standard, but they also do a temporary one-year reevaluation for municipal areas, such as the city of Baltimore. High population centers with low income like Baltimore need the reevaluation once every year to make sure it's sustainable and livable for some of its low-income citizens. And municipalities and cities can offer a municipal rebate in contrast to the state's high property taxes to assist people who do not or are not making enough money to substantiate both owning a property and maintaining it with property tax. Taxes are calculated once every 10 years based on census data, changing income data, and other miscellaneous pieces of information. But it's also reevaluated once a year for a temporary change. And Maryland's able to fund while they only change the amount of money they put into property taxes once or twice a year, Maryland's able to fund this through other auxiliary taxes. We have something called a rain tax, which they tax your land based on the amount of land you own and the amount of rain that fell during the year. And it's called the rain tax. But it actually is a tax to keep the Chesapeake Bay clean. And so people will call it the rain tax, but in reality it is funding Chesapeake Bay cleanup because everything that rains and all the rainwater eventually runs into the bay. So it's actually used to fund that, but it is called the rain tax because, they tax us when it rains. And so through some auxiliary taxes like this, we're able to maintain a high standard of living, high quality of schools, while we have a high taxation. So high taxation with high reward is how the state of Maryland operates in regards to taxes. Budgeting in the state of Maryland is another political thing. While municipalities and cities get a substantial amount of say on their budgets, such as the city of Bethesda or the city of Baltimore, smaller cities don't really get, like the city of Garrett Park or the city of Easton, they don't really get as much say on their budget as they'd like. The county actually does their budget, and the county's budget is passed down to it by the state. The county's budget is an amalgamation of county services that are provided specifically by the county authority, and then the city budgets, which are all mashed together, and they're sent up as the county budget to the state, which approves it. The county then figures out how to divide what parts of its own budget it wants to give to the certain cities that are inside the county. For cities that overlap between counties, they actually have to select one county. They don't get both, which actually makes it difficult for larger cities, which is why cities like Baltimore get their own county, or cities like Bethesda are entirely contained within Montgomery County. But budgeting is political. The teachers union, the harbor union, and the police union get a lot of say into what they want their budgets to be, because they control significant political clout, especially in Baltimore, which is the political center of the state.